Keith, let me just start out by saying thank you so much for the invitation. It's certainly an honor and a privilege to be back on the campus here virtually. And I've got to say that the staff has made this incredibly easy for me, and I greatly appreciate the introduction. But let me just take a moment to reintroduce myself. And the reason I'm doing that is because, despite the fact that there's all these titles and everything that people have talked about so far in terms of my book of work, I do want to say that my perspective today is really going to be about sharing about 50 years of business experience across a number of global organizations and across a number of companies. So what you're going to hear is a global perspective around the importance of inclusion and diversity in clinical trials. But at the end of the day, I got to say, all this aside, if you talk to my kids and my family and my granddaughter, they would say, look, he's nothing but a quad espresso guy. I learned to start drinking coffee at the university, and so I've ended up with a quad espresso at Starbucks every morning. So hopefully you're going to hear an energetic view over the next several minutes. Let me start out by saying, what do I really want to talk about today? And if at the end of the day, we were to say that these few minutes have been a success, these are the four things that I would like to share with everybody on this global forum. First and foremost, I want to provide the context around this unprecedented global business and societal environment that we're operating in. For those of you that are not only students, but graduate students, people at the bench, everybody doing great research and practitioners, and perhaps even some global executives today on this call, I think what you're going to hear from me is that we are operating in a very complex and constantly changing environment. Second thing I want to touch on is the importance of diversity in clinical trials and why that is so important in all of the work that we're doing. And I also want to touch on the fact that, look, we've got to be able to be in tune with a lot of the near-end impacts in terms of what is going to affect clinical trials, not only in what I call the near future, but the long-term future as well. And at the end of the day, I'd like to be thoughtful about why is all this work so important for everything that you're doing as you live, work, and play in your communities. So let's begin by touching a bit on what the external business environment is all about. And there's three or four things, rather, that I want to touch on here that I think are incredibly important. Let's start with the demographics on the left-hand side for the global environment. And although I could drain this slide an entire semester of teaching, I think one of the important things I want to focus on is we're facing an unprecedented aging of the population around the world. In fact, if you looked at some of the stats coming out of the World Health Organization, the United Nations, did you know that the number of people that are going to be 60 years and older is expected to reach about 2.1 billion people by the year 2050? That's a lot of people. And of that billions of people, the number of individuals that are going to be over 80 years of age is expected to triple. In fact, we've already begun the countdown between the years of 2020 and 2050, and it's expected to reach about 425 billion people, or million people rather, in the world today. So it's an aging population that we're facing. And as you think about your work, think about the impact that this is going to have. As far as the demographics in the United States are concerned, I think we're seeing these tectonic changes that are occurring right before our very eyes. The U.S. Census Bureau says that by the year 2045, that less than 50% of the population in the United States is going to be non-Hispanic whites, with the Hispanic population about 25%, the Black population about 13%, and the Asian population around 13%. But what I found most important here in the United States is the growth of intersectionality, and that is the multiracial population is growing. And in fact, according to the Brookings Institute, we're going to see about 176% increase in how people self-identify as being multiracial. Got a great friend of mine that had called me the other day that's moved to the United States, and she said that, and she had moved, in fact, prior to the census, and she said, David, I have no box to check in the census. She said, I'm a Jutinian, and so I'm not quite sure what this all means here in the United States as a real world example of what's happening. The third thing that's happening that I think is important for us to note is this increased focus on health equity. And in the work that I've been doing with a lot of major corporations, I refer to two seminal studies done by Ernst & Young and Deloitte that really talk about that the CEOs in life sciences and in biopharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical industry are saying that health equity, that is the quality of health care and its accessibility to everybody around the world, is of paramount importance to their operations. Over 70% of these executives said that they're going to be investing heavily in making sure that their strategies are aligned with increasing health equity around the world. And of course, I don't need to mention that following that, if not in front of that, or a lot of the governmental and regulatory pressures that are going to be coming from that very thing. Let me move to the right side of this graph, because to me, as a former investment banker, this is really incredibly exciting opportunity for growth. And I want to leave you with three numbers. As you take a look at the global precision medicine market right now, did you know that it's going to reach $657 billion by the year 2026? And that represents about a 15% compounded annual growth rate in that business itself. As you take a look at digital health, the number is even more staggering. It is estimated to be a market of about $657 billion by 2026, which is up substantially since the year 2019. And lastly, having been in the environment of the Mercks of the world and the Bristol Myers Squibb and seeing the acquisitions that were occurring at unprecedented speeds, that M&A market is scheduled to close in 2024 at $257 billion. Now, my experience tells me that's for speed and scale and acquisition of original research that's occurring. So we're looking at a very, very complex business environment that is constantly changing. And I want to point out that in the midst of all of this complexity and all of this change comes another dimension of complexity that we are faced with, and that is diverse populations really bearing a greater burden of disease prevalence. And this is data from the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, that really points out the over-indexing of diverse populations against the white non-Hispanic population. And you can take a look and read for yourself in the areas of hypertension, obesity, diabetes, and to some extent in the area of high cholesterol. So this burden is there and it's present, and it is operating in this environment of business that we all have to make decisions around the work that we're doing, and how does it disproportionately or rather align with this kind of work as we go and do our research on an everyday basis. The other thing that I think is really important, and this is based on some seminal work that was actually done by Artiga and Hinton in 2018, although a little dated, it's still very prevalent, that there are significant social determinants that affect the health environment, and particularly in underserved communities. And they say that it's really the hidden force behind 80% of all of the health outcomes. And as you take a look at and you think about underserved populations and their economic stability, their neighborhoods, their educational levels, the food deserts that exist throughout the United States, as an example, and the communities in which they live, work, and play, I think it's pretty apparent that that these determinants really have an impact on the disease burden by these populations. And of course, the health outcomes that they impact are around areas such as mortality, morbidity, even life expectancy. So these are things that we cannot ignore as we do the work that we do on an everyday basis. Now, one of the bedrocks that I have found in my own personal experience is that clinical trials are really what I call the bedrock of modern medicine. And for you experts that are on this forum call, I don't need to tell you about the fact that, this is really the ultimate proving ground where medicines and new medical devices, they're rigorously tested for effectiveness and safety before they're introduced into the next, or rather approved for widespread use. And it's really mission critical to the work that is being done in these organizations. And I thought that it was ironic that as you take a look at the disease burden, as you take a look at the social determinants of health, and you combine that with these clinical trials, the sad fact of the matter is that these underserved communities are poorly represented in these clinical trials. And I'd like to take a look at the facts around this. On this slide, what I've attempted to lay out is where are we today in terms of clinical trial representation versus the US population. On the left-hand side, you can see that according to the Census Bureau, the estimated populations in 2023, you can see Hispanics represent about 19% of the population, African American about 14%, and the Caucasian AAPI at 6% represents about 67% of the total population. However, in terms of clinical trial representation, you can see that there is an enormous discrepancy around the participation. African Americans at 8%, Hispanics at 11%, with the majority of clinical trial participants being at 81%. And I have a little note there because I found this ironic when we talked about the aging population, that only about 30% of people in clinical trials are over the age of 65 today. So, ladies and gentlemen, we do have a significant issue around clinical trial representation. And I thought there was a wonderful summary in reading through the literature and dealing with many of my clients' questions around this area that was recently put out in a publication by Harvard that talked about why does this really matter? And the article is a very powerful one. It's more of an insight brief. And it talks about the power of inclusion in clinical trials. And I'll read it because I think they're very powerful words. And it says that the lack of diversity can have significant consequences. If you only include participants from a narrow demographic group, the results may not accurately represent the broader population. And here for me was probably one of the most profound things, having been in the industry for a number of years. And that can result in drug and treatments that are just less effective, and I might add, even harmful for certain groups of people. Even harmful for certain groups of people. I think we don't need to look very far in terms of the work that happened during COVID-19, and particularly the development of the Moderna, vaccines. I think, as you know, those clinical trials were stopped as a result of the fact that there was underrepresentation within the African American population. And so they had to go back and redo clinical trials in an effort to try and make the vaccine more relevant for that particular population. Now, when I talk with my clients, I talk about the fact that this matters because there are certain impacts around these three major areas, not only in terms of scientific discovery, health equity, and business performance. And let me just take one click down on the scientific discovery. The diversity in clinical trials really gives us an opportunity to look at both the genetic and environmental factors that really affect drug efficacy and also patient response to certain drug treatments. That's incredibly important in that drug discovery process, given the billions of dollars that are at risk in drug development. On the health equity side, the lack of diversity in clinical trials can actually perpetuate many of the health disparities that we had just talked about in a previous slide. And even more importantly, the fact of the matter is that drug developments on average take between 12 to 15 years in corporate America, in the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical area. It costs billions of dollars to do that. Think about the risk of a non-valid study due to the lack of diversity in your clinical trials, given the demographic change that are occurring today. So all this matters a lot in these three major areas. And I think that one of the things that we have to be concerned about is, are we as an industry, are we as researchers, are we as students, are we as practitioners in the community, are we really prepared to lead in this complex business environment and societal environment where, inclusion and diversity in clinical trials can really have a profound impact on patient outcomes, public health, and business performance, as we've tried to demonstrate so far. Now, having been in the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industry for a significant amount of time, I wanted to talk about the business side of this and in dealing with my clients, why I continue to be such an advocate around the diversity in clinical trials. And what I've laid out for you here is a series of 5 areas that I think have great impact. I'm not going to drain this particular slide, but I do want to talk about the fact that from a business perspective, we're really talking about scientific validity and regulatory compliance. And the business outcome is with the diversity in your clinical trials, you can really improve drug safety and the efficacy of the drugs themselves. And one that I find fascinating is also market access and commercial success. I've talked to many surgeon generals of the United States. I've talked to many leading practitioners, surgeons, and physicians who really talk about the need for increased physician confidence as they write scripts to make sure that they believe that the scripts that they're writing are relevant for the demographic that they are trying to serve. As far as innovation and pipeline development, I want to call out the fact that we are moving technologically toward the development of precision medicine approaches. In fact, the first presentation today that we heard from one of the labs and the results that they're doing was music to my ears on the precision medicine approach that's being taken in the current research agenda. Operational efficiency, diversity in clinical trials, if they're targeted correctly, can help reduce the trial cost. And lastly, and more importantly, I think many of us recognize that there has not been the level of trust in the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industry, particularly within the Black community. As an example, with some of the terrible situations that existed with Tuskegee and with the Henrietta Lacks situation as well, for those of you that are familiar with those controversies. So there's a lot of reason for the business environment or for the businesses to be making sure that they are laser focused on inclusion and diversity in clinical trials. So let me jump to the fact that there are a lot of things that are going to be affecting the future of these trials that I believe are worthy of further discussion. In the near end, health equity, as I've already mentioned before, is a primary issue where 70% of the CEOs are really putting that at the top of the agenda. But as importantly, you're beginning to see significant movement in FDA policy around health equity, and more importantly, decentralized trial sites. Historically, this near-end trend, most of these trials have been in leading research centers of excellence throughout the United States, which many times makes it almost inaccessible to people within communities. And now the movement is toward the development of highly decentralized trial sites that occur in the neighborhoods and in the communities where people live, work, and play. I also see a rapid application of artificial intelligence in terms of patient recruitment. And what I mean by that is the ability to really use AI to target where people in underserved communities are living, right down to the zip code and block analysis, so that there is a better opportunity to recruit patients from those communities, and also to design the protocol that is appropriate, not only culturally and linguistically, for these patients. And lastly, in terms of the healthcare ecosystem, there's a new social and societal agenda that is occurring in how people are collaborating. And Dr. Cook and others on the call, I want to give you a lot of credit for the high collaborative nature that I've seen in so many of these research reports, and particularly Carnegie Mellon, around the partnership between academia, between other universities, between businesses, and as importantly, with community-based organizations to really come at and develop the best solutions for the drugs that we are delivering to our patients. Some of the emerging trends I see from a technical perspective: the movement towards specific genetic profiles being used in a lot of research, and biomarker research being used aggressively. The issue, putting on my business hat, is that the technology many times is outpacing the ability of the industry to be able to keep up with it and to be able to align and to be able to execute at a local level against this wonderful research that's being done in so many of our academic institutions. Also, I'm talking to many people who talk about adaptive trial designs in which, as clinical trials are rolled out, that there are interim trial modifications that are being made on the go in order to be able to hit the precise type of trial protocol that they need. And also a focus on efficiency in order to lower trialing cost, as well as all the time making sure that it is being done in an ethical approach with the highest level of integrity. Lastly, accessibility by design. People are thinking way ahead and really making sure that as they design all of their research protocols and all of their business protocols, that they're really keeping in mind underserved communities and also people with different abilities who have different levels of ability to be able to either focus on mobility or neurodiversity. All of those aspects are now getting put into play as far as the diversity in clinical trials. So it's an exciting time to be in the very area of biomedical engineering. And I think that, one of the things that I have found that is so helpful in all of the work that I've done over 5 decades is the opportunity really to have a framework, an intellectual framework that really allows us to think about how we can drive innovation and transformation in this particular space. So I want to leave you with a framework that I have used very consistently in dealing with clients, and it's guided my own decision making, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry, and that is asking the right questions against a value chain framework such as we have in front of us today, and asking the question, beginning on the left-hand side, for example, in the work that I am doing at the bench in research and development, am I prioritizing the type of research that will make sure that we are going to be addressing the changing demographics of the United States or the aging population of the world today, and viewing it through the important strategic lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion? Am I incorporating those decisions that really question whether or not this is going to address some of the largest health inequities that we have throughout the world today? And is my work going to be able to move society ahead from a health equity and social justice perspective? Let me jump to the manufacturing supply chain side. One of the things as an engineer that I found in all of my global work was, did I have the right people at the table to address the critical manufacturing issue at hand? And was I building the collective wisdom and the collective genius of my team to be able to represent the global perspective and to represent the best talent to address the business issue at the time in a manufacturing question? Because, ladies and gentlemen, we're dealing with very, very complex engineering manufacturing issues here. And so when you're dealing with trying to provide transformative medicines at scale, you've got to have the brightest and best with the biggest global perspective that you can have at the table to solve these issues. And let me just say, in closing off on this slide, market access, disease awareness, and in-market delivery, I think, are also very critical as well. Have you asked the critical questions, say, for example, in market delivery? Am I delivering to the right medicine, to the right underserved communities, to the right diverse populations in the way that is culturally and linguistically relevant? And am I able to say that we are providing these transformative medicines at the highest quality and the highest level to everyone? And as importantly, is this going to address a health equity issue that is so prevalent in that market? So let me just close off my portion of this forum by really talking about why this is so important. Because I believe in the work that all of you are doing, the bit that I've heard this morning, and in talking with Dr. Cook and his team and working with some of the students at Carnegie Mellon University. We're really pushing the boundaries of science and medicine. And I think that we have always got to remember that every discovery that we're making, that everything that we do in terms of breakthrough technology and every step that we take forward is really all done in an effort to try and progress the science and the business because this is in service to the humanity of the world. And I would say that this forum has done one thing for me, and that is it has demonstrated to me that now is the time to act, that we don't have time to wait, that there's an increasing level of urgency here that I think is absolutely important, because we really can't afford to wait any longer. I have been at the front lines really witnessing the transformative nature of the work that all of us are doing. And I say that because at the end of the day, the thing that is important is that the patients are waiting for the results that we have to deliver to them. So let me thank you for this time. I think I may be giving you back the gift of time, Dr. Cook. And I want to say thank you again. And I cannot thank the university too much for providing us with this forum to talk about the things that really matter to all of us. So I'm going to stop sharing and hand it back to you, Dr. Cook.
Thanks a lot, David. We really appreciate you being here with us and sharing your insights. We do have several questions in the Q&A on the Whova app. David, we don't have any time left, though, in this session, but I hope you're willing to go on Whova and answer some of our attendees' questions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you again, and I'll get a copy of all those and make sure that we get the answers back to you, okay?